The Galactic Academy of Peace stood on a shining moon that orbited a blue gas giant. It was the most respected place in the galaxy, a center of learning where the brightest young minds from hundreds of species came to train. Here they were taught how to prevent wars, heal planets, and guide civilizations toward peace. Among the thousands of students, one small group stood out. They were 6 alien cadets, each from a different world. There was Tavar, the proud reptilian warrior from Kaltor 5 with scales like polished gold. Sira, a delicate insectoid with crystal wings that shimmered in the light. Valeri, a soft-spoken avian being covered in silver feathers. Alden, a tall, rock-skinned creature with a deep voice. And 2 others, quiet but sharp, who followed the group wherever they went. Their instructor was a human, Commander Elias Rourke. At first, the trainees were curious about him. Humans were new to the Galactic Alliance, a young species with only a few centuries of interstellar experience. Most aliens thought of them as emotional and unstable, creatures ruled by feeling rather than logic. But they also knew that humans were brave, unpredictable, and strangely fascinating. Commander Rourke was not what they expected. He didn't shout or boast. His eyes were calm, but behind them was something heavy, something old. He spoke slowly, clearly, and often ended his lessons with strange emotional sayings like, "Mercy is the highest strength," or, "A heart that breaks can still save the world." The cadets didn't understand him. They respected his experience, but often laughed behind his back. One day, during a lesson on war ethics and simulation control, Rourke gave them an order that made the whole class whisper. He said, "There is one simulation file you must never access. It's marked Earth Warfront. It is a human prohibition. No trainee is allowed to open it, ever." The room went quiet for a moment. Then Tavar raised his scaled brow. "Why would humans forbid a training file?" he asked, his tone half amused, half challenging. Rourke looked at him for a long second before answering. "Because it's not a training file," he said softly. "It's a recording. Real, unfiltered, and dangerous in ways you don't understand." That answer only made them more curious. When Rourke left the room, the cadets exchanged glances. Sira clicked her mandibles in amusement. "A human prohibition?" she said, laughing lightly. "Their kind is known for chaos, not discipline. What could they possibly be protecting?" Valeri's feathers ruffled as she tilted her head. "Maybe it's just to keep their pride intact," she suggested. "They lost many wars before joining the Alliance. Perhaps they don't want others to see it." Tavar smirked, the edges of his mouth curling upward. "Weakness hidden behind mystery," he said. "Classic human behavior." The group laughed quietly, their voices echoing through the empty classroom. To them, humans were strange creatures who pretended to be wise while hiding their primitive past. Every species had its own war simulations and historical files. Why should the humans' one be forbidden? But there was something in Rourke's tone that none of them could quite ignore. His voice had not carried anger or threat. It had carried sorrow. That night, as the lights of the academy dimmed and the moons rose above the training fields, the cadets sat together in the dorm common room. The stars outside sparkled like silver dust against the dark. Tavar tapped his claw on the table impatiently. "It must be something violent," he said. "Perhaps a record of human cruelty." "They're known for that," Muthan rumbled softly. "Or something shameful," he said. "Something they regret." Sira laughed again, but it sounded forced this time. "Whatever it is, it cannot harm us. We are trainees of the Galactic Academy. We face war simulations every day. What can a simple human recording do?" Valeri hesitated. She remembered the way Rourke had looked at them. His eyes filled not with warning but with grief. For the first time she felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe it's not meant to protect them," she whispered. "Maybe it's meant to protect us." The others went silent for a moment. Then Tavar shook his head. "Nonsense," he said with a grin. "No recording can hurt us," but even as they spoke, the seed of curiosity had already taken root in their minds. Later that night, When the academy halls were silent and the stars outside seemed to hold their breath, 6 figures crept through the shadows toward the restricted archive chamber. The metal doors gleamed faintly under the dim light. A single red warning sign glowed above the console. Access. Restricted. Human Prohibition. Active Sierra's wings shimmered as she whispered, "This is it." The forbidden file. Tavar smiled coldly. Then let's see what the humans fear to remember. They didn't know it yet. But with one careless decision, they were about to witness the truth that no alien had ever been meant to see. A truth born from pain, fire and love strong enough to break the stars. The archive chamber was cold and silent. Rows of glowing data crystals stretched across the walls like veins of light. Each crystal held the history of entire civilizations, wars, peace treaties, inventions, and the rise and fall of empires. But the 6 trainees walked straight past all that. Their eyes were fixed on a single file resting in the center of the room. The label shimmered softly in crimson light. Earth Warfront. Classified Human Prohibition. A holographic warning floated above the console. Warning, emotional hazard. Historical authenticity verified. Proceed at own risk. Tavar let out a small hiss of laughter. Emotional hazard? He said, "Oh, is this a joke?" Sierra tilted her head. "Maybe it means the simulation is too realistic," she suggested. "But come on, how dangerous can emotions be?" Valeri didn't answer. Her feathers fluttered uneasily as if they could sense something wrong in the air. Commander Rourke's voice from earlier still echoed in her mind. Dangerous in ways you don't understand. Mothin placed his massive hand over the access panel. "We are wasting time," he said in his deep, rumbling tone. "Let us see this great human secret." The console beeped, scanning their identification. For a moment, the red light pulsed as if warning them one last time. Then the chamber went dark. A hum filled the air. The temperature dropped, and suddenly the floor beneath them vanished. They were no longer in the academy. The world around them flickered into existence. Smoke, dirt, and fire everywhere. The smell hit them first, sharp and heavy. The stench of blood, oil, and something burning. Tavar flinched. What is this place?" They stood in the middle of a battlefield. The ground was covered in black ash and twisted metal. Explosions thundered in the distance, shaking the air. And through the smoke, figures appeared. Humans. But not the peaceful instructors they knew. These humans wore torn uniforms, their faces covered in soot and tears. They carried weapons, but their eyes were hollow with exhaustion. Sierra's voice trembled. "Are these real, or just simulations?" Before anyone could answer, a blast shook the ground near them. They stumbled, falling behind a wall of rubble. Through the haze, they saw a group of human soldiers huddled together. One of them, a young woman with blood on her hands, was trying to stop the bleeding of a wounded enemy. A creature from another world, alien and strange. "Stay with me," the human woman whispered. "You'll be all right," the alien in her arms coughed weakly. "Why? Help me," it asked. The woman smiled sadly. "Because you're alive," she said, "and that's reason enough." Tavar stared, confused. "She's healing the enemy? That makes no sense," Valeri whispered almost to herself. "She's crying. For him." Then another explosion came, closer this time. The humans grabbed their wounded and ran, not away but toward the danger. They were trying to protect civilians trapped in the ruins. The trainees followed, unable to stop watching. They saw humans drag others from under rubble, share their last drops of water, carry the injured on their backs through fire and bullets. Sierra trembled, her wings quivering. They're dying, but they keep going. Hours passed inside the simulation, though it felt like days. The trainees watched more scenes. Villages destroyed, skies burning red, children crying among the ruins. Every moment felt heavier than the last. Then came the silence after the storm. The battlefield was quiet now. The smoke was thin. The humans, what was left of them, sat together in the ruins of a city. There were only a handful still alive. They looked broken, yet somehow peaceful. One of them, an older man with a scar across his face, spoke softly to his radio. "Command, this is Unit 9. We held the line. Civilians evacuated. No ammo left, no medics. We did what we could." There was no answer. He sighed, closing his eyes. "If anyone ever finds this recording, tell them we did not fight for glory. We fought for each other." Sierra covered her face. She didn't understand why tears were forming in her eyes, tears she didn't even know she could shed. Valeri whispered, her voice shaking. "Is this what humans call love?" Tiver clenched his claws. "No, this must be propaganda. They're trying to make us feel pity." But his voice wavered, betraying his own disbelief. The world around them began to fade. The simulation pulsed with static. But instead of ending, a new image appeared. An old human satellite orbiting a dying world. A message played over faint static, a voice tired yet filled with strange hope. "To any life out there who hears us, we forgive you, even if you never asked. We will rise again." The trainees stood frozen. None of them could speak. For the first time they felt what humans had called the weight of history. They understood now. This wasn't a story of war. It was a story of hearts that refused to die even when the world did. The simulation shut down. The lights returned to the cold silence of the archive chamber. Sierra's voice broke the silence. That wasn't weakness." Valeri nodded slowly, tears shining in her feathers. "No, that was something stronger than war." Tavar said nothing. For once, the proud warrior had no words. And in that moment, the 6 alien trainees realized that humanity's greatest secret was not about weapons or victory. It was about how far love could go when there was nothing left to save. The archive chamber was silent again, but the trainees were not the same. Their hearts were heavy, their minds filled with images they could not forget. The burning cities, the crying children, and the humans who kept fighting when everything seemed lost. But before they could speak, the simulation console flickered once more. The red warning symbol flashed repeatedly as if trying to stop them, yet curiosity, guilt, and something deeper kept them frozen in place. Without touching anything, the file resumed. The room darkened again, and a new scene unfolded before their eyes. They stood now on a vast plain of mud and smoke. Endless trenches stretched to the horizon, filled with exhausted soldiers. The sound of rain mixed with distant thunder and quiet sobbing. This was another human war, older, perhaps the first great one. There were no advanced weapons here, no starships or plasma cannons. Only men and women holding simple rifles, faces pale under dirty helmets. Valeri gasped softly. They fought with such primitive tools. Tivar frowned, confused. Why didn't they stop? No victory could be worth this. But the simulation answered without words. A young human soldier crawled through the mud to reach a wounded comrade. He dragged him back to safety, even as bullets tore the ground beside him. His hands were trembling, his voice shaking, but his eyes, those eyes, held something unbreakable. "Hold on, Tom," the soldier whispered. "You're not dying today." Mothin's rocky face softened. "He's risking his life. For one person." Sierra's wings trembled as she whispered, "They said humans are selfish, but this isn't selfishness." The battlefield kept changing, flashing through time. They saw new wars, oceans of fire, skies full of burning ships, soldiers rushing into hopeless fights. Again and again humanity was brought to its knees, and yet it rose. Sometimes they fought enemies from their own kind. Sometimes it was invaders from the stars. And sometimes it was just nature itself trying to erase them. Each scene was heavier than the last. The trainees felt it in their chests. Pain, fear, and something that felt like grief. Sierra clutched her chest, gasping quietly. "Why does it hurt?" Valeri whispered. "Because they keep loving, even when it destroys them." Then the simulation showed something different. A city, bright, modern, peaceful. suddenly engulfed in a flash of white light. The explosion swallowed everything, leaving behind only silence and ruin. The trainees screamed as the shockwave passed through them. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing but a crater. No buildings, no people. Only wind. Tavar fell to his knees. They did this to themselves? A human voice echoed faintly through the ruins. A man was recording a message into a small device. His face was half burned, his uniform torn. "If anyone finds this," he whispered, "remember us not for what we destroyed, but for what we tried to save." His hand fell and the recording ended. The scene shifted again. The sky above Earth turned black. Armies of alien warships filled the orbit. The planet burned beneath them. Valeri screamed, "Is this real history?" The answer came through a faint voice that seemed to come from the air itself. Commander Rourke's voice, young and sorrowful, speaking from a different time. This was the last Earth War. We lost almost everything. The Alliance was born after this. The trainees looked up at the burning world. They saw human fleets torn apart, continents swallowed by fire, and yet, even as the world ended, there were rescue ships leaving the atmosphere, small, damaged, but filled with survivors. Inside one of them, a child cried, clutching a stuffed toy. A woman, probably her mother, whispered, "Don't look back, sweetheart. We'll find a new home. We'll rebuild." Sira covered her mouth. Tears ran down her face. "They're still hoping. Even now?" Tiver looked broken, his golden scales dull. "It makes no sense. No species should endure this much pain. Why didn't they give up?" Valeri answered softly, "Because it's who they are." The last vision showed the aftermath. Earth was gone, reduced to ash and silence. But a single satellite still orbited the dead planet, sending one final broadcast into the void. The voice was faint, tired, but strong. "To whoever hears this message, humanity is not finished. We will rise again, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in remembrance. We forgive you even if you never ask." The signal faded and then silence. The simulation shut down completely. The red warning light blinked one last time, then went dark. The trainees stood there, unable to move or speak. Mothin's deep voice was the first to break the quiet. No wonder it was forbidden. Sira nodded slowly. "It wasn't just a recording. It was a wound," Valeri whispered, her voice trembling. "They didn't hide it because of shame. They hid it because no one else could bear it." Tavar stared at the blank screen. The proud warrior who once mocked humanity now felt small. For the first time in his life he bowed his head, not out of fear, but respect. They finally understood why the humans called it a prohibition. It wasn't a rule to protect a secret. It was a shield to protect others from the unbearable truth of how deeply a human heart could suffer and still choose love. The simulation room was still filled with silence. The 6 alien trainees stood like statues, their faces pale with shock. The red warning light that once pulsed above the console was now dim and lifeless. The file had closed, but its echoes remained inside their hearts. No one spoke. Not even Tavar, who had been the first to laugh at the human prohibition. His golden scales seemed to have lost their shine. He just stared at the dark screen, as if expecting it to come alive again and explain everything. Sira's delicate wings trembled. She felt strange wetness on her face and touched her cheek. Tears. She had never cried before. Her species did not even have a word for it. Why does it hurt so much? She whispered. Valeri stood beside her, silent. Her silver feathers drooped as she closed her eyes. Images of humans running into fire, of a mother holding her child under a broken sky, filled her mind. The voices still echoed. "We forgive you." She whispered, "No one should have to forgive like that." Mothin, the rock-skinned giant, took a deep breath that sounded like grinding stone. "They burned their own world," he said softly. "But they saved their hearts." The air shimmered faintly. The trainees froze as the door behind them slid open. Commander Elias Rourke stood there. His calm blue eyes scanned the room once and then settled on the still glowing console. For a moment he said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. The trainees turned slowly to face him. None could meet his gaze. Rourke stepped closer, boots echoing softly on the metal floor. His voice, when it came, was quiet and heavy. You opened it, no accusation, no anger, only sadness. Tavar tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. Commander, we only wanted to understand. Rourke looked at him for a long moment. And do you? He asked. No one answered. He sighed and walked toward the console, resting his hand on its edge. That file is not a lesson. It's a memory. A wound too deep for most minds to touch. Sierra finally found her voice. But why forbid it? Why not share the truth with the galaxy? If everyone saw this, maybe they would understand humanity better. Rourke shook his head slowly. Understanding doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings fear. He turned to face them, his expression unreadable. Other species see us as emotional, unpredictable, dangerous. If they saw what we survived, what we did, and what we lost, they might never see us as equals again. They'd see us as monsters, or martyrs. Both are wrong. Valeri took a trembling step forward. Those people, in the recordings, they weren't monsters. They were beautiful. Rourke's eyes softened. Yes, he said quietly. But beauty born from pain can destroy those who touch it. He walked to the center of the room and looked at the trainees, each one broken, shaken yet awakened in a way that words couldn't explain. That war, he said, was the end of everything we were. It took our home, our families, our oceans and forests, but it also showed us something the universe had never seen before. How much love could survive inside destruction. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. The ones you saw in the recordings, they weren't heroes. They were just people who refused to let go of kindness even when the world gave them every reason to. Syrah's mandibles clicked softly. The woman who healed her enemy. She died, didn't she? Rourke nodded slowly. Yes, but the one she saved later saved 10 others. That's how humanity survived. Not through power, not through weapons, but through the chain of compassion that never broke. Muthen bowed his massive head. I did not know courage could look like that, he said. Rourke smiled faintly. Most courage doesn't look like glory. It looks like tears and trembling hands and still choosing to help. He turned toward the dark console again, and for a moment, his reflection shone faintly on the black screen. His eyes looked older than his face. That file isn't forbidden to protect a secret, he said softly. It's forbidden because every time we watch it, we remember too clearly, and remembering hurts more than any wound. There was silence again. The trainees stood quietly, each one drowning in their own thoughts. Finally, Valeri spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Commander, what do you feel when you see it? Rourke took a long breath. Pride, he said after a moment. And sorrow. Pride that we endured. Sorrow that we had to. He turned back toward them, his gaze steady and kind. Now you know what we carry inside. The prohibition wasn't to keep you away from our truth. It was to keep our pain from spreading. But perhaps it's time others began to see. Tavar bowed his head deeply, his voice shaking. Commander, I mocked your people. I thought humans were weak, but I was wrong. You are stronger than we ever imagined. Rourke's eyes glistened faintly, but he only nodded. Strength, he said quietly, isn't about who can fight longest. It's about who can still love after everything burns. He looked around the room one last time. You shouldn't have seen the recording, but now that you have, remember it. Not the war, not the pain. Remember the mercy. With that, he turned and walked toward the door. Before stepping out, he paused and added, the file will lock itself again. No one else should open it. Some truths are meant to be carried, not shared. When he left, the trainees stood in silence for a long while. The faint hum of the archive systems was the only sound. Valeri finally whispered, "We opened a wound that was never meant to heal." And as the door closed behind Rourke, they understood. What they had seen was not just humanity's past. It was their soul. The days after the forbidden recording felt different. The 6 alien trainees went to their classes, followed their schedules, and completed assignments. But something deep inside them had changed. The laughter that once filled their shared dormitory was gone. The mocking jokes about humans were gone too. Now, whenever Commander Rourke entered the room, the silence carried weight. He didn't mention what had happened again. He didn't scold them, didn't report them, didn't even look disappointed. He simply continued teaching as before, though. His eyes sometimes lingered on them with quiet understanding. Yet every word he spoke now carried a new meaning. When he said, "Compassion is the hardest discipline," the trainees no longer rolled their eyes. They listened. When he talked about empathy, they remembered the soldiers who had carried their enemies through fire. And when he spoke about mercy, they remembered the human woman whispering, "You didn't deserve this either." During one lesson about galactic peacekeeping, Rourke asked a simple question. "What is strength?" Before, Tavar would have answered without hesitation. Something about battle, honor, and dominance. But now he hesitated. The others waited for him to speak, but the proud warrior's voice had softened. "Strength," he said finally, "is not just surviving. It is choosing not to become the thing that hurt you." Rourke looked at him for a long moment and smiled faintly. "Good," he said quietly. "You're beginning to understand." Sierra raised one trembling hand. "Commander," she said, "I saw them die for strangers, for enemies. Why? No other species I know would do that." Rourke's eyes softened. "Because love isn't a strategy for us," he said. "It's instinct. We were made fragile, afraid, and mortal. But in that weakness we learned something powerful, how to see ourselves in others, even when they're different." Valeri tilted her head. "You mean empathy?" Rourke nodded. "Yes. The ability to feel someone else's pain as your own. That's what makes us human. It's why we build peace after every war, even if it breaks us to do it." That night, the trainees couldn't sleep. They gathered quietly in the dorm common room, sitting in a circle near the large window that overlooked the silver-blue horizon of the academy moon. The stars seemed closer than ever, glittering like scattered tears across the black sky. Muthen broke the silence first. "Do you think all humans carry that kind of memory?" Valeri nodded slowly. "Commander Rourke does. I see it in his eyes every time he looks at us." Sierra sighed. "He didn't shout when he found out we opened the file. I expected anger, but he gave us mercy instead." Tavar clenched his claws gently, his voice quiet. "That's what makes it worse. I would have felt better if he had punished us. But instead he forgave us, like his people forgave the galaxy." There was a long silence. Each of them stared out at the stars, thinking of the simulation. The smoke, the screams, the faces of the humans who smiled even as they died. Valeri whispered softly, "They forgave even when no one asked. How can anyone live with a heart like that?" Muthen's deep voice rumbled gently. "Maybe that's why they hide it. Maybe forgiveness hurts too much when you remember everything." Sierra's wings shimmered faintly in the moonlight. "Do you think that's why Commander Rourke is always so quiet?" Tavar nodded. "Yes, he's carrying ghosts." The next day, during training exercises, Rourke gathered the class outside under the academy's open dome. He gave them an emergency rescue scenario, an alien ship crash, multiple wounded civilians, and limited resources. The trainees worked hard, but as the mission unfolded, they started to think differently. Instead of focusing on competition or protocol, they focused on people. When Valeri saw an injured simulation figure from a rival species, she didn't hesitate. She ran to help, even though it meant losing points. When Tavar found a dying civilian beyond the safe zone, he carried them out despite risking his own score. Rourke watched silently from a distance, saying nothing. At the end of the exercise, all 6 trainees were covered in dust and sweat, exhausted but strangely peaceful. Rourke approached them slowly. "You all failed the mission," he said calmly. They looked down, ashamed. Then he added, "But you passed the lesson." They looked up in surprise. "You stopped thinking like soldiers," he said. "You started thinking like humans." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Sira smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Rourke chuckled quietly, the first genuine laugh they had heard from him. "No, it's not. It's the best thing any of us can be." Later, as the trainees walked back toward the dorms, they saw Commander Rourke standing alone near the observation deck, staring at the stars. His silhouette was calm, unmoving, like a man speaking silently with ghosts only he could see. Valeri stopped and watched him. "He looks lonely," she whispered. Tavar nodded. "No, he looks proud and sad," Sira added softly. "Maybe that's what it means to be human. To carry sadness but still stand tall." They didn't know it yet, but that night would stay in their memory forever, the moment they finally understood the heart of humanity. Not through battles or victories, but through silence, forgiveness, and the strength of compassion. And though they were alien by blood, something inside them had changed forever. They were beginning to think and feel like humans. Weeks passed since the forbidden recording. The alien trainees were no longer the same. Something deep inside them had awakened, something fragile but powerful. Their teachers noticed the change, their classmates whispered about it, and even the academy officers began to speak of the human class with quiet curiosity. Tavar, once known for his arrogance, now spoke with humility. Sira, who used to chase perfection, now sought kindness. Valeri, who once feared humans, now defended them. And Commander Rourke, he simply watched, silently proud. But change never goes unnoticed for long. One morning, a delegation from the Galactic Council arrived at the Academy. They were tall, cold, beings in shimmering uniforms with eyes that reflected light like glass. The Council's emblem glowed faintly on their chests, 3 intertwined rings symbolizing unity through control. The lead delegate, an insectoid named Counselor Dren, stood before the class. "It has come to our attention," he said, voice sharp and metallic, "that certain materials have been accessed without authorization. Human historical content, prohibited for emotional instability." The trainees froze. Rourke stood beside them, expression unreadable. "Counselor," he said evenly, "they accessed the file by mistake. I allowed them to view it once the seal was broken. They learned from it." Dren's antennae twitched. "That file was sealed for a reason. Humanity's past is volatile. Their emotions are contagious." Valeri stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Contagious?" she said softly. "Then maybe the galaxy needs that infection." Gasps filled the hall. Rourke's eyes flicked toward her, but there was no anger, only quiet pride. Dren's gaze turned sharp. "You will remember your place, trainee." Tavar clenched his fists. "Our place?" he growled. "We are supposed to be peacekeepers, yet you fear compassion. The humans were not weak, they were brave enough to care." The counselor stared at him coldly. "They were reckless. Their compassion destroyed them." Rourke's voice, calm but firm, cut through the silence. "No, Their compassion saved the rest of us. That night, the trainees gathered again in the dorm. The conversation weighed heavy. The council had ordered a full review. The humans' files might be locked forever again. Sierra sat by the window, her wings dim in the starlight. "They want to erase the memory," she whispered, "as if pretending will make it disappear." Tavar nodded grimly. "They fear what they don't understand." Valeri looked toward the stars. Maybe we should show them. The others deserve to know what we saw." Mutton, usually quiet, rumbled, "If we do that, we'll be expelled, maybe worse." Valeri's voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "So what? The humans gave everything for the truth. Can we do any less?" The group fell silent. They all knew what she meant. Humanity had given its life for peace. Now it was their turn to carry that flame forward. The next day, during an academy-wide assembly, the trainees acted. When the holographic screens lit up for the council's announcement, Valeri sent a hidden signal. The forbidden file opened. Images filled the air. Humans carrying enemies through fire, children helping soldiers, people singing together as their cities burned. The cries, the laughter, the courage, it all filled the hall. The audience gasped. Counselor Dren shouted for the feed to be cut, but it was too late. The recording ran its full length, and when it ended, silence fell over the entire assembly. Even those who had mocked humanity before could not look away. Commander Rourke stood at the front, his jaw tight. "This," he said softly, "is what you tried to bury. This is what made us human." The counselor hissed, "You will answer for this, Commander." Rourke met his gaze without fear. "Gladly." He turned to the students. "Remember this day. You've seen what others call weakness. But it's not weakness, it's our greatest strength. It's what allowed us to survive when every logical species said we couldn't." The trainees stood beside him, united. Valeri raised her chin. "We saw love in their pain," she said. "And now we understand it. You can't erase that." The punishment came quickly. The 6 trainees were suspended from the academy, pending investigation. Commander Rourke was removed from his teaching post. But something had already begun. Across the galaxy, whispers spread. Cadets from other academies requested access to the human files. Officers started quoting human philosophers. A saying began to circulate in the spaceports and barracks of 100 worlds. To be human is not to conquer, but to care. In his small quarters before leaving the academy, Rourke packed his few belongings. He looked up when he heard a knock. The door slid open. Tavar and Valeri stood there. "Sir," Valeri said quietly, "we're sorry." Rourke smiled gently. "Don't be. You did what was right. Humanity didn't survive by obeying fear. We survived by defying it." He placed a small hollow disk in Valeri's hand. "Keep this safe. It's a copy of the recording. One day, others will need to see it too." Valeri's eyes shimmered with tears. "We'll protect it, sir." Rourke nodded. "Then humanity's memory is in good hands." He turned toward the window, watching the distant blue world of Earth glimmer faintly through the stars. "Maybe," he whispered, "we were never meant to be remembered as conquerors. Maybe we were meant to be remembered as a lesson." The trainees left the academy that night, disgraced by title but heroes in spirit. And as their ship lifted into the void, the stars seemed brighter, almost alive. They carried more than their species' pride now. They carried the heart of humanity. Months had passed since the trainees and Commander Rourke were removed from the academy. The Galactic Council believed they had silenced the scandal, erased the evidence, and buried humanity's story once more. But truth, once awakened, does not sleep again. The 6 former trainees now traveled together aboard an old, rusted transport ship named Aurora's Hope. It was slow, noisy, and barely held together, but to them, it was freedom. They carried a single holodisc, Rourke's copy of the forbidden recording, and wherever they went, they shared it. Their first stop was a mining world called Vorta 9, a place where thousands of laborers toiled under the rule of a distant government. The aliens there were cold and weary, working without hope. When Valeri showed them the recording, humans helping their enemies, dying for strangers, forgiving the unforgivable, many of the miners broke down in silence. Some wept, others stared at the screen, as if seeing light for the first time. One miner whispered, "They had nothing, but they gave everything." From that day on, the workers began to help one another more. They stopped competing for food rations, stopped hoarding resources. They built small shelters for the weak. They started living like humans once did, and the spark spread. On a frozen moon near the edge of the Orion Belt, the crew showed the recording to soldiers stationed in a remote outpost. The commander, there, a creature with scales like black glass, asked coldly, "Why should I care about a dead species?" Valeri said softly, "Because they lived in a way that made life worth remembering." The soldiers watched in silence. When the holo ended, the commander stood for a long time. Then he removed his weapon belt and placed it on the table. "Perhaps," he murmured, "it's time we remember what we were meant to protect." That night, the soldiers didn't train for war. They shared stories, laughter, and hope. Across the stars, the message traveled like wildfire. Not through rebellion or force, but through whispers, through screens, through memories. The words of Commander Rourke echoed again and again. Compassion is not weakness, it's strength in its purest form. The Council tried to stop it. They seized data channels, blocked signals, and sent agents to confiscate the recordings. But it was too late. The story had already become legend. They called it the human truth, and it began changing worlds. Meanwhile, the crew of Aurora's Hope kept moving, spreading the message. But deep inside, each of them carried something heavier, a quiet sadness. They missed Rourke. No one knew where he had gone after his dismissal. Some said he had returned to Earth. Others whispered he had been taken by the Council. Tavar, who once laughed at humans, now spent hours looking at the stars. "He gave us more than a lesson," he said one night. "He gave us purpose." Sira smiled sadly. "Then we must honor him the only way he'd want, by passing it on." And so they continued until one day a signal reached them. It was weak, almost lost in static. A voice, familiar, human. "This is Commander Rourke. If you're hearing this, it means the truth survived. Humanity's story lives on. I have no regrets. Remember, our greatest weapon was never our technology. It was our heart. Carry it well." The transmission ended. Silence filled the cabin. Then Valeri whispered, her voice trembling, "He's alive. Somewhere out there." No one spoke, but their hearts burned brighter than ever. Years passed. The galaxy changed. Species that had once mocked humanity began to adopt their principles. Peace treaties were signed between ancient enemies. Memorials were built on dozens of worlds, each one bearing the same inscription, "In memory of the lost world that taught us to be kind." Human songs were played in alien tongues. Their quotes were carved into alien stone. And slowly, the shadow of fear that had ruled the stars began to fade. One day, on a quiet planet covered in green fields, Valeri and her crew landed to rest. There they saw a small monument built by local settlers. It was simple, just a stone pillar with the image of a human hand reaching upward. At its base was a single phrase: "To be human is to love beyond reason." Sira knelt beside it, tears in her eyes. "They remember?" she whispered. Tavar placed his clawed hand over the engraving. "No," he said softly. "They became what they remembered." Valeri smiled faintly, looking toward the horizon where two suns burned gold and blue. That's what he wanted all along. They stood together in silence, feeling the wind move gently across their faces. The universe felt alive. And for the first time, Valeri understood something deeper than words. Humanity hadn't vanished. It had simply changed form. It had become a memory that lived inside every heart brave enough to feel. As the sun set, Valeri turned on the ship's recorder and whispered into it, "Commander Rourke, if this message ever reaches you, know this. We carried your story. We carried your people. And because of them, the galaxy is healing. They called your compassion weakness, but it became the seed of everything good that survived. Thank you for teaching us how to be human." She stopped the recording and looked at the stars. For a moment, she thought she saw a faint blue light among them, like the reflection of old Earth watching from afar. Maybe it was just her imagination. Maybe it was something more. But she smiled because she finally understood the truth that humanity had lived and died for. Even if the body fades, the heart never does. And so, through war and silence, through alien voices and forgotten worlds, the legacy of humanity lived on. Not as conquerors, not as gods, but as the first to teach the galaxy how to care.